Hi, I'm Albert Pasaoa.
Hello, my name is Kevin Jefferies.
And this is the 635 Podcast. The 635 Podcast is about local politics, economics, and social and cultural issues in the Alvin Community College area. The views expressed on the show are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of Alvin Community College. And welcome to the podcast. We are here at ACC's library, taking a break from the studio. And so we have a nice view of the local community. And I'm here with Kevin Jefferies.
Hello, Albert.
And today we're going to talk about transgenderism and how that has become a political issue, not just in the United States, but right here in Texas. But before we go there, let me just show you that we also can be followed on our Twitter page, 635. You could find us at 635TX at Twitter, where we post links to this podcast as well as other news items you might find interesting. So let's get to the first story. So what stories are there?
What I put together was a series of stories that came out in the past 2 or 3 weeks, mostly coinciding with the primary elections, which looks at some of these issues that have come up involving care for transgender kids and looking at primarily as a political issue. Texas Tribune on March 9th had an analysis, and what was that? That was yesterday. Fighting care for transgender kids shifts from a fringe issue to a litmus test for Texas Republicans. And the story is an interesting one. It says that whereas maybe 2 years ago, 4 years ago, they're talking about bathroom bills and things like that and other issues that are, let's say, social, the types of things that could drive voters to the polls, also to create wedges that could be advantageous, that some of these issues regarding transgender kids, care potentially, help in a transition or whatnot, seems to be politically useful, for the party. And so I thought it might be, I was doing this in classes earlier, following this a little bit also because there's pushback. When the state of Texas does something, there's always the opportunity for the national government, if it has the means, the rights, the ability to do so, push back against the state. And also there's some internal stuff that's going on as well too. We're discussing checks and balances in the classroom. And so I thought that was useful, both in terms of federalism, the national and state governments, the relationships there, but also in terms of internal checks and balances. And this one story that approaches it in a political issue I thought was interesting. Let me just read the first couple of paragraphs here. Governor Greg Abbott sparked a national uproar last month when he authorized child abuse investigations into families that allow transgender kids to receive gender-affirming care. And we were discussing this in class. This does fit under the sort of thing that a chief executive can do in terms of executive orders, directives, how the executive agencies move forward. And so there is a directive, I'm looking at it right here, from February 22nd, that was delivered to the Commissioner of the Department of Family and Protective Services. And this is one of the larger areas of expenditures. Health and Human Services, Family and Protective Services are within that. Saying, consistent with our correspondence in August 2021, the Office of Attorney General has now confirmed in the enclosed opinion that a number of so-called, quote, sex change, close quote, procedures constitute child abuse under existing Texas law. So in other words, the governor's office picking up from the Attorney General's office, which of course, as we established last week, is a separately elected position within the state of Texas. They issued this ruling, this opinion. It's a non-binding legal opinion that sex change procedures or any of transgender issues for kids by parents can qualify as child abuse. And again, here's the governor directing the department to go forward with that. Because the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services is responsible for protecting children from abuse, I hereby direct your agency to conduct a prompt and thorough investigation of any reported instances of these abusive procedures in the state of Texas. Then it goes on just for a couple of other paragraphs to provide a little bit of clarity associated with this. And here's the letter from Ken Paxton, Attorney General. This is dated February 18th, so I guess that's 4 days before the governor's letter. And
Before we go there, can you clarify, what's the sequence of events that happened here? Was it the Attorney General was the one who first moved to deem it child abuse, and then now the governor is backing him up on that?
An opinion was requested. In fact, if we look at the Paxton's letter of February 18th, it's to the Honorable Matt Krause, Chair of the House Committee on General Investigating. So this would suggest that it begins with a member of the Texas House of Representatives requesting commentary from the Attorney General. And this is one of the things, an analysis from the Attorney General. And this is one of the things the Attorney General is constitutionally mandated to do within the state. If he's getting a request about the nature of some sort of legalistic thing within the state, then he's supposed to provide that. And this gives you an idea about how this kicks off. Dear Representative Krause, you ask whether the performance of certain medical and chemical procedures on children, several of which have the effect of sterilization, constitute child abuse. You specifically ask about procedures falling under the broad category of, quote, gender reassignment surgeries, close quote, request letter at 1. You state that such procedures typically are performed to transition individuals with gender how do you pronounce that? Dysphoria to their desired gender, and you identify the following specific sex change procedures. And it lists a number of things: sterilization through castration, vasectomy, hysterectomy, oophorectomy, medoidioplasty, and other things related to it. You qualify your question with the following statement: some children have a medically verifiable genetic disorder of sex development and do not have the normal sex chromosome structure for male or female is determined by a physician through genetic testing that require procedures similar to those described in this request. In other words, in rare circumstances, some of the procedures you list are born out of medical necessity. For example, a minor male with testicular cancer may need an orchiectomy. My apologies. I'm not a medical person. This opinion does not address or apply to medically necessary procedures, and so they're talking about things that go a little bit beyond that. And in his estimation, and it's a pretty lengthy letter. It's worth.
This is a letter from who to who?
This again is Ken Paxton. He's our Attorney General. And on the request of the individual who is currently the chair of the Texas House Committee on General Investigating, and I suppose under the idea that, if this does this constitute child abuse, and if it constitutes child abuse, does that mean the state needs to be investigating this? And let's see if we can look at a conclusion.
So Krause wrote to Ken Paxton asking for his opinion.
His opinion.
And then this is the reply.
Yes.
Okay.
So the summary: each of the sex change procedures, and that's in quotes, and treatments enumerated above when performed on children can legally constitute child abuse under several provisions of Chapter 261 of the Texas Family Code. When considering questions of child abuse, the court would likely consider the fundamental right to procreation, issues of physical and emotional harm associated with these procedures and treatments, consent laws in Texas and throughout the country, and existing child abuse standards. So seemingly from the point of view of the Attorney General, prosecutors can go ahead with investigating transgender procedures involving kids authorized by parents as being potentially child abuse. Now here's where things get interesting, because there's pushback. And as I mentioned, there's two ways to look at it. One, and I think that what Paxton is doing here, this is from a Texas Tribune story again of March 9th, yesterday as of today, where there is concern that Texas could potentially have a monetary hit, a funding hit from the national government, because the bulk of the money the state of Texas gets in terms of medical health and human services, something on the order of 60% of it comes from the national government. And so what that means is the national government does have leverage over the state of Texas when it comes to a variety of things related to it. So if the national government thinks, for example, that perhaps this is a violation of equal protection, then it could withhold some of the funds. I don't think that a particular move has been made so far, but the story here suggests that the Attorney General is sort of taking the lead and assuming it's going to happen from the national government, so suing the Biden administration ahead of time. Texas is worried it could lose over $1 billion in federal funding over Governor Greg Abbott's directive requiring medical professionals to report transgender children receiving gender-affirming health care as potential child abuse. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton amended an existing lawsuit suing the Biden administration Wednesday, so this would have been yesterday, attempting to void guidance issued by the U.S. Health and Human Services on March 2nd that said restricting someone's ability to receive medical care solely on the basis of their sex assigned at birth or gender identity is likely a violation of the Affordable Care Act for federally funded entities. And again, by extension, this could also be be problematic in terms of the Equal Protection Clause. So the Equal Protection Clause hasn't been interpreted in terms of gender identity. Not that I'm aware of, and I don't think it has. The federal guidance came in response to Abbott's directive issued late last month, which we just read a little bit through, to treat certain medical treatments for trans children as possible crimes to be investigated by the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. And again, when I'm doing this in class, one of the things I try to draw distinctions of when are we talking about things at the state level, when are we talking about things at the national level. So this would be the national government potentially penalizing monetarily the state of Texas, denying access to funds as a consequence of its activities right here.
Now, this lawsuit that Texas is filing, I mean, it's like hypotheticals piled on top of each other. So it's like, how could they sue? Can they sue if the federal government hasn't done anything yet? How do they sue? Because so far, has there been a single case where some type of transgender operation has been considered child abuse?
Well, that's the next issue, and that gets into some internal issues within the state of Texas. So that's underway. But in terms of your question about whether or not this can be, how far this can go forward, that's a decision of the courts. One way you can approach this is the Attorney General simply filing a lawsuit, and anybody can file a lawsuit for any particular reason, as a way to demonstrate or to start to build a case. Now, whether or not, obviously this is against the national government, it has to be in the federal courts, and whether or not a federal judge, federal district judge, trial court judge is going to see merit enough in order to hear this would be a different sort of question. And of course, that can be appealed to the courts of appeals and whatnot. But that first story that I was talking about, and we might want to come back into when we're done with all of this, thinking of this primarily as a political issue, in a sense, it really doesn't matter what the result is as long as people are talking about transgender kids. And if it's the case, as this one story alleges, that the Republican Party sees advantage in this, then it doesn't really matter what's going to happen in a substantive sense regarding the issue itself, just that voters are thinking about it. And so this might be something that can help their folks get to the polls. Now, the other thing that's an issue here, and if we can tie this into elections as well, which I find kind of interesting, remember that both the governor and the attorney general had substantive challengers in the primary. The governor was able to successfully, as we talked about last week, deal with these because he got a majority of the vote in the Republican primary, and so he is the nominee of the party, and all he needs to do right now is to start to think about how he can position himself to do well against Beto O'Rourke in the November election. Ken Paxton did not win the majority in the first round. He got a plurality, but he is going to run against George P. Bush, the current land commissioner, and of course, part of the George Bush family. He's the latest George Bush.
What's Bush's stance on all this?
I think it's a little bit up in the air. I'm not familiar with it. Now, it could be, since we've got the runoff coming, that he is going to have to stake some positions regarding this. What I mean is that if this becomes a major issue within the Republican voters, again, because all we're talking about right now is the people who are going to show up. Well, who did show up last week in the Republican primary and are going to show up in, 2.5 months, something like that, 2 months, in the Republican runoff. We're talking maybe 2, 3, 4% of the population who is able to and will likely show up. And those are the individuals that matter right now. So I wouldn't be too surprised if you see the governor start to backpedal a bit on this because he doesn't need to go forward. He's already got his party nomination, but to see that see Paxton continue on this because it is in his best interest to make the nomination.
All right, so the governor pushes on this issue because he thinks it'll play well among Republicans. Now that he's secured the Republican nomination, he kind of wants to go to the middle and wants to maybe avoid divisive issues. Meanwhile, Republican Ken Paxton is fighting for re-election, and so he's still trying to appeal to the base
He's
and
still trying
going
to appeal to
for
the base.
these issues will appeal to his base, but not
Yeah.
necessarily appeal to mainstream. And so now there's going to be some tension. Now, what is the interaction right now between Abbott and Ken Paxton regarding this issue? What has Abbott said about this so far?
I don't think he said a thing, and there are other indications that he's distancing himself from some of the more extreme positions. And I'll give you a couple of examples.
Was this pre or post primary?
Post-primary.
Okay.
Post-primary. Again, it's a
Big
whole
difference.
different thing for him now.
Uh-huh.
In fact, he has to reposition. When we looked at numbers before, we mentioned that O'Rourke is only about 4 percentage points behind him, and that's very,
Really?
very tight. That's very, very tight.
Wow.
Unusually tight. And remember that O'Rourke did very well in 2018 when he was running against Ted Cruz for the Senate position. I think he lost by like 1.6 percentage of the vote, which is very, very tight as well too.
I'm curious about Ted Cruz. By typical Republican senator standards, is he popular or unpopular? Is he
pretty unpopular.
pretty unpopular?
He's pretty
I always got that impression, which
the
is
story is that he's pretty unpopular among his the party structure.
so
within the
okay.
Senate,
So
yes.
okay. So Republicans, maybe are we talking about the Republican establishment or Republican voters or both?
Well, it depends on who you listen to. I mean, some people will tell you anybody. John Boehner, who used to be the Speaker of the House, just peppered a lot of different things he was doing with, the occasional slam on Senator Cruz. So anyway, but you've got that there. But getting back to what we were saying in terms of the governor, he issued a statement recently, kind of sympathetic towards teachers. He was kind of taking on teachers recently, but now it seems like he's backing away from that. There is also someone who's been a past supporter of his, a Dallas billionaire who makes his money off of pipelines, I think primarily, who is actually suing Beto O'Rourke for disparaging things he had said about financial donations that this fellow had given to the governor after the freeze last year. And when asked to comment on this, apparently the governor said he wasn't going to. So it seems like he's distancing himself from these positions. And again, these positions were very important for that first step he needed to take. But for the second step, he needs to start worrying about the people in the middle. The people that might be tempted to vote for O'Rourke, but now he needs to make sure that they rethink that and perhaps vote for him coming up in November. And there's a lot of time before we go there. So that's why I wouldn't expect, now I may be completely wrong, I wouldn't expect for the governor to be pushing this, but I certainly would expect Paxton at least up until the election coming up. Now, if we want to talk a little bit about, in terms of within the state of Texas, again, the national government's in the position to be able to put some limitations on money sent to the state of Texas in terms of a variety of different sort of medical purposes, with the idea that Texas, by doing this, and again, they're defining this as discrimination. Under the Equal Protection Act, under the Affordable Care Act, in terms of gender identity, which again is a brand new area. So there's questions about how far that would necessarily go in the courts. But there has, given a question you were asking a second ago, already some activity in terms of parents of transgender children who are under investigation as the governor's directives based on the analysis of the Attorney General. So you have these investigations going forward, and that is leading some pushback. So here's the story from, when was this? March 8th, 2 days ago.
And so what was the last action the governor took? He sort of threw his weight behind the Attorney General. Is that?
Well, let's say he used the Attorney General's letter as justification for going forward with investigations against individuals, and that's part of what's happening here. Let me read a little bit through this. This is again from a couple days ago. In 2016, when Texas tried to stop transgender students from using the bathroom of their choice, there were protests, press conferences, and a whole lot of anger directed towards the state's elected officials. One mom tried something different. She invited Attorney General Ken Paxton to have dinner at her house with her 8-year-old transgender son, and Amber Briggle, told recently the Paxton and her son washed up together in the bathroom before dinner. He turns around and looks, said, "This is nice. It's been a while since I had kids this age." More than 5 years later, Paxton helped set in motion a targeting of families with trans kids unlike anything experts or lawyers say they've ever seen. And the Briggles are now caught in the crosshairs. So this family that invited him over are now being investigated. According to their attorney, they're one of several families who are being investigated for child abuse for providing gender-affirming medical care to their children. So if I'm understanding this correctly, and there's a lot of, connections that, we could certainly make here. You have the directive from the governor authorizing investigations, and now you've got some investigations going forward. Raising a transgender child in Texas has become one long political emergency, they said. In late February, Paxton issued a non-binding legal opinion that we just read a little bit through that equates certain gender-affirming medical treatments with child abuse. Governor Greg Abbott then issued a letter directing the state child welfare agency to investigate any reported instances of these abusive procedures. So those were the two letters we read from just a second ago. While most gender-affirming care focuses on social transition, we're allowing a child to express their gender how they'd like. Some transgender children take puberty blockers and other things, and that seems to be the issue within the particular letter. Since Abbott's letter, the Texas Tribune has been able to confirm that Child Protective Services have opened investigations into at least 5 families, and the real number may be much higher, so we don't know exactly what's going on right here. But here's the pushback. There is a lawsuit filed by 2 interest groups in the state of Texas, the American Civil Liberties Union of Texas and Lambda Legal, seeking to block these investigations from proceeding. And so that's the latest thing that has occurred.
So there are investigations going on. That's what this article is saying, that
Yes.
they've already gotten the ball rolling.
But you have interest groups going to the courts asking that these investigations be stopped. And here's another story, I guess March the 1st.
Have any of these families gone public?
Well, this one is, the one we were just mentioning, who had invited Paxton to their home 4 or 5 years ago, and now they're being investigated.
And then have they spoken out since? That would be really interesting.
Well, in this, I don't, to be honest with you, the story talks a little bit about them. Beyond that, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, that would be interesting to look into. I mean, yeah, I'm sure they maybe don't like all the attention, but at the same time, sort of bringing it out there, would probably maybe they would be able to get some help from some people to,
Well, here you go. Yeah, exactly. And again, it could very well be they're giving to these 2 groups, ACLU, Lambda Legal, to be their spokespeople. Here's a little bit from that story. The state of Texas is investigating a family for child abuse after the parents obtained gender-affirming care for their 16-year-old transgender daughter. It's believed to be among the first of these probes since the governor directed the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services to target such care a week ago, as we saw. The child's mother, a DFPS employee, Department of Family Protective Services, so actually one of the employees of that agency is being investigated by the agency.
Whoa.
She's been placed on leave after asking for clarification from her supervisor about the recent executive branch orders. Now, apparently the order from the governor is saying you have to investigate this.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I guess if they're not doing that, that means they're violating the governor's directive. So the child's mother, an employee asking clarification. Obviously, if you're asking clarification, then you're kind of putting yourself out there. I guess that gets to your question why, if you are one of these parents, you may not necessarily want to speak out because that puts you in their crosshairs. The investigation came to light on Tuesday, the day of the Texas primary elections. In a lawsuit, the American Civil Liberties Union and Lambda Legal filed in Austin on the family's behalf to block investigations of families seeking such medical care for their children. The suit names both Governor Greg Abbott and the Department of Family and Protective Services as defendants. No family should have to fear being torn apart because they're supporting their trans child. Audrey Perez, a policy and advocacy strategist at the ACLU of Texas, said in a statement. So again, I'm sure that, if you do these sorts of things, you're kind of yielding to the organization to be your spokesperson.
Yeah.
Week before the election, Governor Abbott and Attorney General Ken Paxton issued a partisan political attack that isn't rooted in the needs of the families. This is the ACLU's point of view. Paxton opinions includes both body modification surgeries, mentions puberty blockers, a variety of other sorts of things. Teenagers' family is not named. Lawsuit instead refers to the parents as Jane and John Doe and the daughter as Mary Doe. When an investigator visited the family's home last Friday, they interviewed the parents and the child. The lawsuit states the family has so far refused to hand over the girl's medical records to the agency. If the agency determines the family has committed child abuse, the parent would be placed on child abuse registry and the mother could be fired according to the suit. Yeah. So, and that seems to be what the ACLU is focusing on right here. And, they have the ability, these people have standing to sue, block the investigations. What exactly they're saying about the investigations that is problematic, legally, they're not completely clear about. I could make some things up, but I'm not sure exactly what they're saying. At the Texas Capitol on Tuesday, a group of more than 100 people protested Abbott and Paxton's directives. And anyway, it's going on here. And this other one, now, okay, so these folks have gone to a trial court in the state of Texas, and apparently the trial court said, yes, you have to stop the investigation, and what the Attorney General then is doing is appealing to go to the courts of appeals. And in class, I found it interesting to point out, all of these individuals who we're talking about, they were on the ballot last week. A Texas appeal court sided with the parents of a transgender teenager in a ruling Wednesday rejecting Attorney General Ken Paxton's efforts to allow a child abuse investigation to proceed. So whether or not this investigation goes forward is going to be up to the courts in the state of Texas. The ruling will allow a lower court to hold a hearing scheduled for Friday where lawyers for the American Civil Liberties Union and Lambda Legal will ask a judge to stop the state from launching child abuse investigations against parents who have obtained gender-affirming care for their transgender children. This crisis in Texas is continuing every day, so as they go on a little bit more right here, ACLU is saying it's groundless. Attorney General's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment. And I guess it's kind of open right now. So, it's up with the Court of Appeals right now. I'm sorry, Court of Appeals has said, yes, send this down. You could send this down to the courts, trial courts, to figure out whether or not the substance of the issue, whether these things can go forward, will be dealt with. And again, as I mentioned with the case with the governor, it could be that, the substantive issue associated with this stuff is probably less important than making sure that this becomes a topical political issue.
Oh, yeah.
Because it could very well be, if you're running Ken Paxton's campaign, you don't really want this to go away. Because this is the kind of thing where, you can drive your supporters to the poll. And it would be, again, you asked about George P. Bush, and I don't really know what he's saying about this.
Yeah.
He's probably trying to figure out where he should position himself on this issue right now. This is one of the things, when you talk about money in campaigns, it's polling, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would be a bit surprised if it would be advantageous for him to take a softer stance than Ken Paxton on this.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, I'm not sure, who knows, but then can he outdo him? Or maybe just match him. I think he might just echo him to take that issue off the table and then focus on something else.
It could be. I don't know. I'm looking right now. I Googled George P. Bush and transgender, and I'm really not seeing anything.
Okay, so he's staying quiet.
Staying quiet, it seems right now, which may not be the bad thing to do. Let the Attorney General do what he's going to do. See how the numbers go one way or the other. Wait until he makes a move and the numbers make a move, and then figure out what you're going to do in response. So,
and then Abbott, in the meanwhile, is going to try to hope for some type of sort of dual sort of narratives going on with Ken Paxton talking about this issue, and then Abbott just completely talking about something else.
He may not have to touch this anymore. He may go off on other sorts of things. And again, this is the thing that I think in a general election could potentially, I'm not an expert, and again, when I say an expert, I mean someone who, let's say, has poll numbers right in front of you that are fresh,
But Beto may not let it go away, right? What's Beto's stance on it?
He would be in favor. Yeah, that tends to be the more liberal stance. That's a decision for parents to make. It's not Texas's, one of the arguments would be that underlying this is prejudice against transgender individuals. And so that would be something that certainly Beto and Democrats would be opposed to. Now, whether or not it's in their best interest for this thing to continue to be an issue for the next few months before the November election, I'm not really sure.
Beto Beto could actually spin this in a way that might even appeal to some conservatives. And that would be really the libertarian stance of let's not have big government come tell us how to raise our children.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And like, so the same people who believe in private schools or homeschooling or school choice, who don't want the government playing a big role, they may say, yeah, maybe I wouldn't support transgenderism for my child, but I don't want the government coming and telling me, having my child, pray too much is child abuse, or do any other activity as child abuse.
That's the position that business conservatives took regarding this bathroom bill of 2 legislative sessions ago. They saw this as being very problematic in terms of Texas's ability to continue to reach out, be business friendly. Now, the Republican Party, you do have the business-oriented folks, the libertarian individuals that I guess are kind of aligned right here, but you've also got, the moralists, the religious, the evangelicals that see this as a violation of traditional values or whatnot, and those folks vote. And again, if you simply want to think about this in terms of electoral politics, I mean, Paxton isn't doing anything that is illogical in terms of that.
Yeah.
He wants to make sure that an issue that is going to distinguish him from his opponents, especially, if you think Bush, you think of people that tend to be a little bit more moderate.
Yeah.
At least business.
More of a business Republican.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They get along with the evangelicals, but they're not themselves evangelical. They're primarily motivated towards business sort of issues. More towards they're not libertarian, but libertarian could kind of I think see eye to eye with them in these sorts of issues. But ultimately, it's going to be about who's driving who to the polls, and how is this going to be beneficial to again the Attorney General's prospects in the runoff.
Yeah, this is going to be really interesting because there's so many different alternatives. I can imagine even Beto trying to also stay quiet about this. Like they both have an implicit agreement that we're both just going to kind of not really talk about this. And I vaguely remember that might have been the issue with, I think it was with gay marriage, and maybe it was Obama and Romney, where they would say what their stand was. I think it was during one of the debates, and Obama would say something like, I'm for it, and then Romney said, I'm against it, and they neither elaborated. It was so awkward, but they both knew that they have to take their stand, but they don't want too many sound bites coming out of them, and they don't want that to be too big of an issue, and they both essentially agreed to not really debate about it.
The politics of gay marriage was still in its still being sorted out. Let's say, then again, you're talking obviously the 2012 election. It wasn't until I think a couple years later that you had the Obergefell's decision by the courts, which effectively constitutionally legalized gay marriage. But again, that was somewhat in the future. Yeah, you have to be a little bit strategic in the positions you take. But we'll find out soon enough. Let me Google O'Rourke and transgender and see if I don't know if he's made any, outward statements about this. Transgender. Again, I think that he would probably be in favor, but your good question is how vocal would he be?
Yeah,
Does he see an
be on
opportunity?
favor on paper,
Yeah.
but then talk about other things.
Well, here you've got, this is from late February, Texas Governor Abbott bullying children with trans care directive.
That's what he said.
Beto O'Rourke.
Okay.
Yes. So again, bullying is a big thing right here, so trying to,
Well, how do you turn down that sound bite? Like, I want to say, if you want to call him bullying, that's good.
bullying's a good, if I was going to advise O'Rourke, I would say, yeah, use that word, because obviously that's something that's quite topical. Schools are supposed to be attentive to bullying. They're legally culpable if they're not. Does this open the door for bullying? Now, again, how you go forward best in this environment, I'm not completely sure. I'm not if I was really good at that, I'd be out making a lot of money running campaign.
And so many of these issues, are you familiar with sort of attitudinal like polling data about Texas attitudes towards, say, gay marriage or gay people in general, and like trends? Are you familiar with
Well,
that?
the trends in general, nationally, and Texas would lag behind it a little bit, increasingly accepting of it. And the argument is that is mostly when I went to grad school, when we're talking public opinion, a lot of change is argued to be generational replacement. The folks that are opposed to it, they weren't born in that environment where it was accepted. Whereas the younger you are, you're more in an environment that's accepted. And so when Granny and Grandpa, shuffle off and they're replaced by folks that are younger, then that means that maybe some of the more negative attitudes they might have had, I'm sorry to be cruel, are buried with them and replaced by different sorts of attitudes. It's the same sort of thing with all sorts of racial attitudes, role of women in the workplace, things like that. So this isn't that unusual. Texas, too.
Yeah, my impression was even among Republicans, like young Republicans, attitudes towards gay marriage and gay acceptance in general, they've become more accepting fairly rapidly.
Yes.
And my impression was after the Supreme Court ruling legalizing gay marriage, I thought I sensed Republicans being relieved that it was essentially taken out of their hands. And then now they can say, oh no, well, we can't do it. I remember, who's the vice presidential candidate who ran with Romney? What was his name?
Ryan.
Paul Ryan. I remember him saying, yeah, it's a defeat, but we're going to move on and to fight other issues. And it's almost like, thank God, we don't
talk about that.
I think they must have looked at polling data among even young Republicans and saw that it was a losing issue. But what I think is interesting is that is such a rapid change so quickly in terms of their attitudes towards gay people, but they still have very strong opinions about abortion, right? Like that hasn't seemed to change. So it's interesting how some issues they're willing to apparently to drop fairly quickly, right? I mean, it's almost like they dispensed of, the debate, any debate over gay people, and have switched. Now the battle line is trans. Yet the issue of abortion is still right there.
That has been noted. Public opinion researchers have noted that that hasn't changed much over time.
Yeah.
I will point out this one thing though. It's one thing to look at public opinion. It's another thing to look at. Let's say public opinion in general. The other is the opinion of people that are going to vote in certain elections, and that's why I kept saying, what you're for Paxton right now, you're worried about the opinion of the people that are going to show up to vote in the runoff election, and that's a small percentage of the population. Democrats aren't voting in that, moderates aren't voting in that.
When is the runoff?
It is in late May, 20-something. Let me look at it real quick.
That is really interesting. Like, is the turnout bigger or smaller than the primary?
Much smaller.
Yeah.
You could see 2 or 3, 4% turnout. Sometimes less. May 24th. In fact, actually,
I don't. Okay, I'm my guess, and I'm not a government political science person, but I would say that Bush has no chance. Like, what partisans would be fired up over Bush and why? I guess they would have to really hate Ken Paxton, but still identify as Republican. I don't know if those people exist in sufficient numbers.
And some of it could potentially be fear also, because there is this idea that Paxton could be very vulnerable, simply because
to
of
a Democrat.
Okay. He's
so
under
electability.
Indictment. He's been accused.
So
of
it could
bribery.
be electability.
He's been accused of in the general election.
Okay, so then if I were Bush, I would just say, this guy is going to lose to a Democrat who is then going to push all sorts of Democrat policies. Vote for me, I could win.
Exactly. You're saying,
I can win. Vote for me.
We'll be socialists. Yeah, exactly. So I'm looking right here. Hold on a second at results from the primary runoff in May 22nd. The Democratic primary around here. Yeah, had 5% turnout in Brazoria County. And I don't know what it was for.
Wait, that was a runoff, 5%?
In 2018, 4 years ago, the last midterm election. How many people showed up to vote in the runoff?
Are there always runoffs for something? Is like the runoff
Well, the
election a
runoff
regular
occurs, not necessarily. I mean, a runoff happens, we mentioned this last week, the rules in the state of Texas are, you become the nominee of your party, Republican or Democratic Party, if you get a majority of the vote. If you just get a plurality, like Paxton did, he got 43%, then you have to have a runoff. You run against the next top vote getter. In this particular situation, that was George Prescott Bush.
But aren't there going to be multiple runoff elections like going on? Like, aren't there multiple positions that are in a runoff?
There are a few. Let's see. Democrats have some. O'Rourke won outright, but I think most of the rest of the races for the for executive position, they have a runoff. We went over this last week, and there were some folks in some of the other positions.
So there'll just be a runoff election where you go and you get to vote on all the different
if you
spots.
voted in the primary.
If you
If you voted in the primary.
If you voted in the primary of all.
That's the one.
Wow. Okay.
Restriction right there. That again,
Okay.
voting in the primary makes you for this electoral cycle, a member of that particular party.
Yeah.
You can participate in that party's affairs. You've demonstrated an interest. You've already had an impact on, who the county chair is going to be, who the precinct chair is going to be. You could go to the conventions and whatnot. So there you go.
All right.
And again, not much turnout with the Republicans either in the last runoff.
Okay. All right. Well, that's an interesting hot topic. It's started off national topic, and now it's here in Texas, and will probably show up in somewhere or another in the upcoming general election. So,
Certainly will.
all right. Thanks a lot.
You're
Take care.
welcome. Thank you.